Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 80, and today we have a treat because I have Trumpetman with me again, and we are not doing the review of a new set. Instead of that, we decided to revisit our mom set review and try to figure out what we did right, what we did wrong, and maybe what to look for in the next set review, which is coming next week. That's official. But before we do the next one, we might want to maybe take a look at what went, especially what went wrong with this one, and where we made our biggest misses, and maybe try to dissect why that was the case. Okay, I'm clicking like an idiot on not the presentation, but before we go into that, I would like to remind you what was our set review, because it's different from other set reviews in a way that it was evaluated based on previous set game in hand win rates. So different sets have different win rates, and I basically normalized them. That means I converted all the game in hand win rate results for every card so that the average win rate would be around 50%. And then based on those percentages, we assigned slightly arbitrarily letter grades to each percentage score. So, for example, A pluses were cards that had a normalized win rate of over 60%. And there were 8 cards since Midnight Hunt that had over 60% win rate, and examples being Sheldred the Apocalypse. And from this set, actually, Sunfall made it to the A plus grade, just to give you a more recent example.
For A's, win rate 58 to 60%. And so 21 cards since Midnight Hunt. Siege Veteran as an example. And then from Mom, we have Chrome Host Siege Shark.
A minuses were cards that had a 55 to 58% win rate. There were 77 cards since mid that had that distinction. There was only one common that fitted in the A minus grade, and that was Inspiring Overseer. But he's not alone anymore. Preening Champion now is also one of the few commons that actually reach that A minus grade.
For B pluses, these are the cards with win rates 53.5 to 55%, 94 cards since mid. Evolving Adaptive from Phyrexia All would be one. And then from this set, we had the Captive Weird. Ooh, I love that one.
Then there are Beast cards with the 52.5 to 53.5% win rate. 99 cards since mid. Now it's definitely over 100. Reckless Stormseeker was an example of that card, and it was a good card, but in the wrong color. And I thought that I will keep up with the theme, and I found another Seeker that costs 3 mana, is red. It's a good card, but probably its win rate was dropped by the fact that the color that it was in was not good. So perfect analogies there.
And then B minuses, 51.5 to 52.5% win rate, 149 cards since mid. Aether Channeler from Dominaria, best mana war. And then from this set, we have Collective Nightmare, just excellent, efficient removal spell.
By the way, I have to remind you that Neil doesn't have an idea what's in those slides, so I'm super impressed by the fact that he's ad-libbing everything. The C pluses are cards with the win rate between 50 and 51.5%. There were 270 cards since mid that fulfilled that criterion. And one of them was Infectious Bite from Obi-Wan, and sort of bite variant. And guess what? Cosmic Hunger from Mom also made that exact grade, being a very similar card to Infectious Bite.
Yeah, some good parallels there. All right, our C grades. These are the win rates 49 to 50%, 211 cards since mid. I see you kept one of my favorites, the Glamorous Outlaw from Streets of New Capenna. I mentioned I liked that one before. And from this set, just classic, bread and butter of the deck, Aetherblade Agent.
And C minuses were between 48 and 49, 222 cards since mid fulfilled that criteria. We have an example of Ichor Plate Golem from Obi-Wan, and this set, Skittering Surveyor, made that list. Just for the people that love the Skittering Surveyor way too much. It was a C minus card in the set.
Yes, How the Mighty Have Fallen.
It was never mighty. Dominaria was just poor set, and it was strong in comparison.
Relatively mighty.
It might be good if it was reprinted in LTR, I guess.
All right, so D pluses. These are the 47 to 48% win rates, 206 cards since mid. Phyrexia LB1, bring the ending. And I think this can also be the types of cards where sometimes they're situational or just, in bad colors. So sometimes these D pluses for that reason, because blue was not good in that set. For our parallel, we have negate in March the Machine.
Yeah, I tried to make those parallels pretty parallel, but of course, blue was busted in this set, and still negate made the D.
Well, negate is the ultimate situational card.
These are between 45 and 47%. 302 cards since mid made that grade. Examples being Goring Warplow, sort of middling Death Toucher from Brothers War. And in this set, Tenured Oilcaster made it. If anyone remembers what it does, congratulations. I think I played it a mighty 0 times in the format.
I find it interesting. There's way more D's than C's for whatever reason.
It's just because it's arbitrary. I actually tried to play around with it, and I think we might adjust the gradings ever so slightly for the next set review. I have a new file that's called the new tier list, and that's going to be slightly twitched so that the bell curve of the grades is going to look more bell curvy.
All right, so our D minuses 42 to 45% win rate, 145 cards since mid. Our parallels continue. Gixian Skullflare from Brothers War, not so great. Very similar card. Ichor Shade from Mom, not so great. Although I do like it in red black.
Yes, but still,
it's not
I
so
love
great.
this. I'm very proud of this parallel. Thank you. And there's F's. Cards that you probably never want to play, win rate under 42%. Example was Goblin Childbirther from the Retro Artifact part of Brothers War. And in this set, Crystal Carapace was the only card that got an F grade. And
that's impressive.
With a small caveat, I did not evaluate, I didn't calculate the win rate for the Legends because we didn't do the Legends in the set review. But from the cards from the main set, Crystal Carapace is the only F, and that's impressive for that set. Okay, so this is a bit about Mom's characteristics. So in red on this graph, you see what percentage of all the cards that I analyzed since Midnight Hunt fit into each grade. And in blue, you have what fraction of cards in Mom fit into each grade. And you can see that A pluses and A's are quite consistent. There were handful of cards that fulfill those grades in Mom, but it's similar to when you look at it compared to the big data set. In A minuses, you had quite few A minuses more in Mom than in the previous sets. So like this lower grade A things, over 55% normalized win rate, they were more abundant. There were a bit fewer Bs because you had fewer B pluses, fewer Bs, and roughly the same B minuses, but these are minor differences. Where there were bigger differences is there were plenty of C plus cards in this set, many more C minuses, and many fewer Ds. So and almost no Fs. So basically, I think that the set designers managed to trim the number of those D minus F cards and put them in the C plus C minus slot, and that probably made the set a much better set than it would have been with a bunch of Fs.
Oh yeah, I think that's really interesting looking at the graph. It's funny because I've been playing a lot of Crimson Vow because it's been on Arena, the last week. And I think, if you consider having even more A minuses in this set relatively, although this is aggregated. But I think partly what makes this, I would say, a Prince format, March the Machine, like Crimson Vow, but, much more, I think, replayable is having all those C's, these role players that allow you to actually like play the games versus just a bunch of cards that do nothing.
I'm also very much impressed, even though it's a small difference, like 1.7 percentage point difference in the number of A minuses compared to other sets. But when you think that they had to compete with like many more C pluses and C minuses and very few Fs and Ds, that makes it a bit more formidable, because that means, of course, that the baseline deck must have been pretty strong if there was basically no weak cards in the whole set.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go to our performance. So what I show you here is wait, laser on. By how many grades did we miss and how many cards are in each category? And red is always Neil, and I am always in blue. And 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this graph means by how many grades did we make a mistake. So if we set a C plus and the card was a C plus, it was a 0 difference. If we said C plus and the card was either B minus or C, then we missed by 1, basically. So we both got roughly 45 correct 100%, which is not terrible. Neil won by 1. There you go. Then we had a bunch of cards that we missed by 1 grade. There was 84 from Neil and 82 from me. And then we go to the differences. When Neil had a bunch of cards that he missed by 2 grades, 74 of them, I only had 56 of those. And then he had much fewer that he missed by 3 or 4 grades, because he had only 40 that he missed by 3 grades. So by a whole letter scale, I had 54 of those. And he only had 12 that he missed by 4 grades, and I had 22 of those. And then we had roughly even numbers of big misses. So like 10-ish missed by 5, 5-ish missed by 6, and handful that we missed by 7, 8 grades.
Does that mean like about half the cards or something like that? We were only about 0 or 1 off. Is that
yeah, I think that roughly 50% of the cards we were 0 to 1 off.
That's pretty good, I think.
It's not bad at all.
Little pat on the back.
I think that we did well, especially that was the first review that we did, and of course the scale is.
We're really setting ourselves
tricky.
up for failure next time then.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to grade it because we graded a very strong set, and now we're going to grade, I think, a set that has some power issues. I don't know if it's going to be a good or bad set. I think that the power level is generally, at least at common levels, I think it's generally lower. So it's going to be very tricky to switch from one to the other. We'll see how it goes.
The one card of 8, if I had to guess, would be City on Fire. We'll see.
I don't know. I'll have a list of all the big misses from both of us when we can say why we did mistakes that we did. Especially your graph looks very interesting, and one of them looks pretty interesting. So this is basically what I did. Is I simulated what win rates would our cards have if they had the grades that we given them. There is a bit of randomness in there because, of course, I couldn't have assumed that a card with the C plus will have exactly 51% win rate. I just made it randomly being somewhere within the region of the grade. And then I correlated the actual win rate on this axis with our stuff. And the R-square of both of us is around 0.33, so like explains 33% of the variation, which I think is a decent score. I'm doing it mainly because it's hard to evaluate how good are those numbers. For our future set reviews, we have the same kind of scheme of the presentation, and then we can compare how we did compare to the previous set. Are we improving in our evaluation, or are we actually getting worse as we do it because the set was tricky to predict? I think that's going to be good for our learning, and in the future evaluation of our set reviews, we're going to have comparison with the previous formats, and that would be something to look at. Right. So now I move to the cards that we had the biggest split between. And I'm starting with this Glistening Deluge because you gave it a sideboard grade. And I think that you learned from your mistakes. Now you're just going to give it a normal grade.
Oh, yeah, that was a big mistake.
But I'm looking at the cards where we had the biggest split in grades. Here it's actually 6 grades difference between us, obviously because you graded as a sideboard card rather than by a normal card. And then we're going to look what grade did the card get eventually, and we can discuss maybe why we thought that the card is going to be like it was and what happened that it wasn't. So obviously this one is a bit of a warm-up. I know that you wouldn't have given a B if you were grading it as a main deck card, but the actual adjusted grade was exactly a D. Yeah.
You got it.
What do you think?
Yeah, Glistening Deluge. I mean, I thought maybe with some of these types of cards, they were more main deckable than they ended up being. And I thought, oh, well, you 70% of the time, at least your opponent will be one of these things. But I think it was worse than I thought it was, and then also, learn from not giving it a sideboard grade since we're trying to do it for the win adjusted rates overall with 17 lands.
Yeah, and also, I mean, strange you only gave it to one card in the whole set, but yeah, there we go.
It's because I set up this learning opportunity. So
there we go. Here we have cards. The second card we had 6 grade difference, and that's City on Fire. Yeah, you gave it a B, I gave it a D. What do you think it ended on?
I think this card was pretty good when it was good and pretty bad the rest of the time. So people probably played it in the wrong spots. So it probably ended up as C-.
Okay, I'm readjusting a window, so give me a second. There we go. It's a D+.
I was debating between those two.
But yeah, I think that the grade is a bit unfair for the card. I think it was the low grade for this card is because it was too often played in decks that it shouldn't have been. When in the deck that it should have been in, it was a really good card. I think, probably like a B- even level, maybe C+ or something. But yeah, because people overplayed it optimistically,
we have to account for that on these build rounds.
We have to account on that when we are giving grades. And actually, there will be another example of a card where I think I nailed it how people are going to play the card, while you actually maybe over adjusted on the side of people are going to play it anyway side. Okay. Here we have a Grafted Butcher. You gave it a C+, I gave it an A-. What do you think? Where do you think it landed?
This card is good. But there were some fractions. It ended up being pretty good. I think it's just worse than like Preemie Champion though. I'm between like B or B+ for this now, thinking about those. I'm just gonna go with B.
Yeah, it got a B- in the end. I mean, I gave it an A- in the set review, and I specifically stressed that it's a very optimistic hot take. With me betting on Phyrexians as an archetype being a good archetype, and it turned out to be pretty much bad archetype. And there we go, adjusted grade is a B-. But I think that, if it was a knight, it would have been probably A.
Right.
With the same kind of ability. So yeah, it's just like sometimes you have to make punts in set reviews, and gambles, and I gambled on the Grafted Butcher, and that gamble didn't pay off. Still B-, it's not a bad card at all. But yeah, definitely you were closer to the actual reality than I was in this case.
All right. Furnace Reigns, yeah. I gave it a D. You gave it a C+. You already know the answers in front of you, so
yeah, that's why I'm not guessing.
Me asking you is not going to give it much, but to switch it up, this is actually an interesting one too, because it sort of falls in. This card was like very, very, very good in red-black, but basically almost unplayable everywhere else. And so if we think about that, then it's like, how much do people put it in the wrong deck? You said C+. I feel like people would know that this is like just a gold card. So I think it probably came out to be like a B-.
Nailed it. As I said before, he never saw the slides, so he has no idea about it. It was exactly a B-. I was actually underestimating how people know. And this is like a difference between City on Fire, where people don't know that they shouldn't be putting it in their deck, and Furnace Reigns that has been iterated so many times that people already know. They know, okay, I play this deck. Giving haste to your own creature is not good. Stealing something and giving it back is not good. And then they know to put it in the sacrifice deck, and there it performs. And in this set was pretty solid, and was going late also, and making the red-black decks, if you were the only red-black drafter on the table, quite stronger.
Well, this one's embarrassing. Italy. I gave it a C-, and you gave it a B. I thought, well, 7 mana, it's a lot. Obviously, the effect is good, but I mean, how can you really get to 7 mana? Now, I think this one's kind of interesting because if we think about the set review, we literally had just finished with Phyrexia 1v1. And that set was very, very, very hostile to 7-mana spells. So I think the important thing to take away is that we need to make sure that like we course correct after every set and just like settle down and then evaluate the own environment, not based on what just came before it. Because Atali, it's either an A minus or an A, but I'll just say that it's I saw a lot of A minuses on your graph, so I'm gonna go A minus.
Damn it, he's playing the game. He's playing the game. It is exactly an A minus. Yeah, I mean it was a big miss also for me just giving it a B, but it turned out that, and I was like super optimistic about it. I said, oh, I mean, I know it's 7 mana. I'm just gonna give it a risky B, and it turned out to be an A minus. The card is just busted. I played it a couple of times, and it did a lot of things because other people were also playing very good cards. So yeah, there you go. Invasion of Vryn is the next one. You gave it B, I gave it a C minus.
Ooh, this is a tough one. I like this card, but pretty much not every single one, but almost every battle ended up underperforming, which I think was a good place to be because a lot of the times we see these new mechanics and like if WotC overshoots on them, it's like the first time they printed equipment, they were just like completely busted in half. The first time we had Phyrexian mana completely busted in half. So I think being a little conservative with the battles maybe was a good thing. And they ended up being a lot of fun too. And we still had some good ones. Invasion of Vryn was one of the trickier ones because it was sometimes good, but a lot of times like you didn't have time to actually play it and the tempo of it. Also, this is best of one data, I assume. So it's going to get a little bit of a knock from that. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's just like a C.
C minus. But yeah, it's pretty close. I mean, it's a very, very narrow win rate bracket that those cards fit in. Yeah, I mean, it was, given that the fact that it was in the best color in the format, C minus is not particularly enthusiastic grade for it. But it had its places. It's again, it probably suffered from people trying to put it in their blue-white decks, for example, where it wouldn't perform very well, I guess. But I guess in the blue-black, if you didn't get enough Invasions of Amonkhet, it was a good card.
Mm-hmm. Our next one, we said the Mirren Bane Splitter. Now, probably a lot of you don't even know what this card was because it never saw play, but the red flash equipment that gives +2/+0. I gave it a C in the set review. You gave it a D minus. And gotta say, I think you're right. I think it's a D minus.
It's actually a D, so slightly better than I evaluated it. But yeah, I mean, the card didn't perform. I think you were a bit optimistic on the equipment theme in general.
Yeah, I had some hot takes. Although Beantown Beatstick, that card was great.
That card was great. But yeah, I mean, again, this is the thing. We're going to look after that how we evaluated each color, and we had trends there as well. All right, the next one is Invasion of Kaladesh. That's the one that flips into a vehicle with X4 flying, and X is the number of artifacts you control. You gave it a B minus. I gave it a D plus. What do you think it ended up in?
Oh, well, I think definitely the truth was in the middle here somewhere. I think also this card was probably, it didn't go in every blue-red deck, but it was really good in some blue-red decks, so that makes it kind of tricky. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, it was just kind of an average card. I'd give it a C again.
It actually had the C minus, so yeah, close to that. But I think it's an unfair grade because the card, whenever I played it, was really, really good. It's just that the number of homes that it was supposed to be played is very narrow as well. So yeah, I see that chat is saying that was it Sherkovich was right show. I would like to remind you the previous slide that showed that Neil actually predicted the whole set way, way better than I did. It just so happens that in the cards that we had a big split were the cards that, well, I was more right than not right. But my problem with the set evaluation was that a lot of the cards that we had maybe 2 or 3 grade difference, Neil nailed them and I didn't. And that's the whole shtick.
Elspeth Smite, the white removal spell. I was saying this was C plus. You were saying this was a D. I liked that it was only 1 mana, but really, I don't think there weren't really white controlling decks, which really is a huge knock on this card. It was fine that you could play it in some of the aggressive white decks, but the problem was the pacifism actually ended up being pretty good, which really made this card quite a bit worse. So I think I was probably off on this a little bit, but it was still a fine card. But I'd probably say like C minus.
Are you sure you're not peaking there?
I'm not peaking, I swear.
It is exactly C minus. Okay, we have, I think, 2 cards left, and the penultimate is Portent Tracker. You get a C plus. I give it a D because I don't like 2 mana dorks in general, especially when they're 1/1.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think this card actually, by the end, people didn't like it. I always thought it was like pretty good, like a reason to be in green, although I thought green was pretty bad in general. But I would knock my grade down a little bit. I would say it was like a C, but I think people played it in the wrong spots, so maybe it's even worse than that.
It's C minus. So we sort of end up exactly in the middle of our grades here. But yeah, I think that lots of people played it where it shouldn't be. I think that, I would be very skeptical of putting it in decks where you don't have 2 Blighted Burgeonings, basically.
Yeah, that's
and also there it's questionable, because if you already have 2 Blighted Burgeonings, do you really need that extra Portent Tracker? Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. I guess it also depends on top end and how much of the 7 drops you managed to put in your deck.
Mm-hmm. Right. Traumatic Revelation, the discard spell. I gave it a C. You gave it a D minus. I think this card actually was pretty good. I don't know if it was C plus level good, although it might have been. Or do I just stick with my C? I'm going to go out on a limb. Oh, okay. It's a C minus.
It is a C minus. Yeah, I mean, you were much closer on that card. It turned out to be better than I thought, and I still didn't play it very much because I'm not a big fan of that effect. I played it a couple of times and it was fine, but that's exactly how I'd explain it. Fine. It's still better than the gift.
It ended up just being fine, but getting a C minus is nice in the sense that like 2-drops were really good, but there weren't that many good 2-drops, so you could play this C minus 2-drop effectively and not have to have a premium one. So the fact that you get this kind of late was like part of its power.
Yep. Okay, I think that we're down with the card. So I also looked at our performance and prediction at different rarities, just to show, and also maybe to inform you before our next review where we were the most off, and maybe what are the factors that contribute to us being off. So the first graph, I look at how many grades we were off at each rarity level. And in this graph, I'm calculating it as an absolute value. So if we were 2 grades below, we get still 2 points. If we were 2 grades up, we get 2 points. In later graphs, I'm going to look at the average. So basically, if it was 2 below, then it's -2. If it's 2 above, it's +2. And then I calculate average of that to see if we had any tendencies of overdraft, of overgrading or undergrading particular card types. And basically, we had the biggest misses on an uncommon level. I think part of that is because there were many battles at uncommon.
Battles, yeah.
And there we were definitely off. And we were actually decent at common level, especially you. You were on average by 1.46 grades on commons, and I was average 1.7 grades on commons.
I mean, it makes sense, right? That we did best at commons because they're mostly the types of things we've seen before. So if it's iterative and we get better at grading things over time, just as Magic players, we've recognized them, and so we kind of come to expect.
I mean, I guess also commons have a smaller range of grades because they will be mainly within the C to D kind of range. Maybe some of them will be B, and Pre-League Champion will be an A, clearly. Mm-hmm. But also rares should have the widest range of grading because they will go definitely from F to A+. And still, we had a bigger error on uncommons, and I guess that this is something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I think also uncommons can be a little bit harder because it's harder to see like the B+, A- uncommons versus like, yes, rares have a wider range, but I think there's more like A's and F's, whereas uncommons really span the range more. So that
Yeah,
might actually
maybe.
be secretly the trickiest one. But I agree with battles being, particularly difficult to evaluate.
So when we look at this range, when we look at the minus and plus, we basically overrated at every rarity level. We were too optimistic about cards, and that's, I think, something we maybe want to look at next time. That even though the set was quite powerful, we still overrated it. So maybe we should be more critical about cards' power next set reviews. We overrated rares by roughly 0.8 to 1 grades. We overrated uncommons by 1.4, 1.3, and we overrated commons by 0.6 and 0.4. And it's actually, yeah, it is a bit funny that you were better at predicting commons in terms of the distance, absolute distance from the grades, but mine were missing on both sides, much closer in a way. So I don't know what to give it to you to there. I mean, I guess
I'm just a dreamer. What can I say?
you're a
With these
dreamer.
magic cards, giving I distinctly remember I gave the white equipment a B. The core halberd or whatever it's called. Basically, it was almost unplayable.
Oh, there you go. That was
Anyways.
well, and we all have our weaknesses, and that's something that's one of the reasons why we did the set reviews in the way that we did, so that we can actually scrutinize what we did, and we have actual numbers that can help us evaluate what we did wrong, because we want to make a better review next time, hopefully. Not that this one was bad; it was, I think, pretty solid, but it always can be better. And I think that trying to look at the numbers of what we did wrong, and maybe why, try to figure out why, is going to definitely help us next time. Right. So this is the same thing, but for different colors, and we overestimated almost every color except for blue, which we slightly undervalued, which is not surprising. I don't think that many people had blue as the best color in the set before the set was released, but it became quickly apparent that blue was much stronger. And as far as Dispersal and Printing Champion, I think main drivers of that, and the rest of the cards sort of piggybacking on the power of those two.
Yeah, and then we way overshot red, which was the weakest color. But I'm wondering with this here, we would basically need to predict it. Does it matter too much about the metagame, how it ended up shifting? Well, I guess that would more counteract this in a way. This is literally just the card strength, right? But
Yeah, this is
it's
just
like
card trick, but
how much of it also at the end of the day is like, a rising tide lifting all the boats, right? Because like all the blue cards would be inflated, right? So if we don't predict to bump all those up when looking through the set review, I think this is going to be one of the hardest things to correct for, right? Because you would have to kind of predict like, oh, all red overall is weaker, so I need to bump all of them down versus blue.
I think that's the way. I think that this is the way that I'm going to approach it for the Lord of the Rings. I'm going to say, okay, this is the strongest archetype. This is the second strongest archetype.
You're gonna have to plant your flag and double down and be like, all these cards are worse.
But that's what makes it super hard, because those things are connected. It's I listen a lot to 538 and American election analysis using numbers, because it's numbers and it's a topic that I'm not close to my heart, American politics, but it's interesting to see how they approach the data. And very often they link certain states, and if they have a poll from Michigan, they know that they have to change their numbers in Wisconsin, and it's very similar in here, that if we think that red is going to be good, and we clearly thought, we sort of inflate all the red cards, and actually because red was not as good as we thought, we overshot red by quite a lot, by 1.6 grades on average, which
it's also tough because at the end of the format, I actually like red a lot more than green if we look at it. So my personal evaluation of these cards would be higher because I found more success with the the plan in red. But again, we have to think about like how the cards will be used on average. And so it's difficult.
Yeah, it's also like, again, I mean, lots of the cards that we were looking through when we had discrepancies, lots of these cards, I don't agree with the final grade that the data gave. I would evaluate Invasion of Kaladesh as a much stronger card. It is, again, how you play it responsibly, for example. And the problem with our review is that we have to evaluate the average 79th user, which is an invested player, but not necessarily always good in playing build-arounds, for example. So that's the problem that we will have to face in our set reviews. But in the end, reviews are there to have actionable advice for every level of player. And I think that us predicting what is going to be good or bad is going to be, more useful for everyone.
And that's why everyone has to come back and listen to our Lord of the Rings review. Because when we give a card a horrible grade, but we'll say, it's actually one you can build around, it's going to be great, but just not overall, you'll have to listen to that content.
That's true. Next week. Yeah, we also had a pretty big misses on the multicolor cards. And specifically, I would like to stress this is multicolor color identity, which means that it contains all those transform cards that flip into multicolor cards, because it was easier for me to calculate it like that.
Yeah, but also, I guess that's interesting because those ended up being pretty good, but we thought they were even better than they ended up being, huh?
Probably. That's also like there's a bunch of multicolor battles, and I guess that does help. That a large chunk of battles was multicolor. We did a really good job on black. If it counts for something, I guess we had only like 0.3, 0.5 great difference between the reality and what we assumed. Medium results for green and white with roughly 1 mark off the target. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, so we have the biggest misses. And we'll start with you, so you can maybe analyze why you think you missed on several cards. And our first graph is going to be the biggest misses in the down, so the cards that you underestimated. And the second graph will be the biggest misses that you overestimated.
Okay, so we'll go through it, and so I don't take all day, I'll give a brief explanation on each one. So at -7 on this miss was Breach the Multiverse. Again, when I talked about Italy, I kind of thought maybe 7 drops just weren't going to be that playable. I gave it a little bit of a recency bias because of Fracture LB1. Obviously, that card was insanely good, and I also didn't give credit how much like the milling would win you the game on Breach the Multiverse, so I was just way off on it. At -6, Italy, I already went through that one, so big miss on that.
But it's funny that you have Breach and Italy, the cards that are basically the same card,
basically identical reasons. Yeah. -5 though, Artistic Refusal. I think I might have underestimated Convoke, especially the instant one in general. Artistic Refusal just did look a little bit expensive, but I was also like, sometimes you'll just trade off. But it ended up not being the case, right? It wasn't that hard to build out a board because you didn't have to block that often because the battles actually weren't that good. If the battles were better, I think cards like Artistic Refusal would have been worse, but that wasn't the case.
There was also a bunch of Vigilance, I guess.
True, yeah. I mean, there was enough ways to make... Basically, just the Convoke cards were almost all great. So I just was a little bit off on that mechanic. They looked great, but they were even greater. Furnace Reigns -5. It didn't look like there was a lot of payoffs for it, but I also kind of thought maybe people will put it in the wrong decks. But as we kind of saw, being the Steel and Sack plan has been, again and again shown up. So I think people know how to evaluate those cards. So when there's been patterns to cards, then the whole class of just like all Magic players get better and better at playing with those things over time. And so we'll definitely have to take that into consideration, and we can be a little bit more accurate with it. Because anytime that a Steel and Sack strategy is viable, then it's probably going to be a pretty good card, like probably at like in a B- if we had to put at it. We were both way off on Seed of Hope. I gave it a -4 grade here. I think we both said it was an F or something like that, around there. Ended up being a pretty decent card that you could play 1 or 2 of. I think we didn't really think through the numbers in terms of playing like 18, 19 permanents in a deck and that being a viable thing, and the little life bump and all that. Ended up just like, we didn't think of it in the framework of it being kind of like an opt or something like that with the card selection. So solid card there. Just weird looking card, I think. Speaking of also weird looking, Invasion of Amonkhet, one of the best cards in the set. -4, so probably I gave it a decent grade, but it was even better than that. And it's funny because we overrated battles in general, but that one definitely underrated. It was almost always at least a 3-for-1. So I think I just didn't consider how good that card would be. Aerial boost at -4. Again, the convoke thing, I kind of already touched on that, but it was really, really easy to play that for free. And I think defensive tricks got a lot better in the set because of the way that battles played out and people pre-combating things a lot more often in this set, but also, of course, with your Vigilance Knights, Aerial Boost was great on offense too. Some that I didn't miss as much, -3s here. Invasion of Segovia, the blue Kraken things. After having played the set a lot, the flip version of this, giving everything Convoke, is just disgusting with the untaps. So the card was just super strong. Astral Wingspan at -3. I still hate that card, but yeah, again, another Convoke card. So I just missed on those a bit. And then Printing Champion, probably the world, underrated that card, being an A-. I guess I gave it a B-.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, A- is just like hard to guess for a common, to be fair.
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting one, because that Printing Champion would always be a great card, but the fact that it was amazing at convoking and was a knight and flying was particularly good in this set, and also attack battles when other things didn't. It's like it literally checked all the boxes to make it an A-. Whereas if you look at Inspiring Overseer, it's just busted every time. So I think like we have to consider how good the card is plus the context. Because I don't think Printing Champion in every set would be an A-. I think it has a good floor. Like it'll always be at least a B-, probably maybe even a B. But I don't think it would be.
And we jam slammed the B- on it, and that was like a no-brainer for both of us. I think we had exactly the same grade on Printing Champion as at a B-. And
yeah, we probably even had the floor wrong, is my guess on that. I think it is a better card than a B-, just in the environment. But I think in a lot of formats, it wouldn't be an A-. Like there took a lot of factors to get there.
Right. So now I have the next graph of you, but maybe I'll do my misses first. So my biggest miss was actually Invasion of Segovia, which is, again, ironic as we missed on the battles, but in the opposite direction. But Invasion of Segovia, I gave it a pretty bad mark. I guess I just didn't see how backbreaking flipping it is and how easy flipping it was in the decks that played it. Card played much better. By the way, did you ever try it with Horobi?
Invasion of Segovia?
Yeah.
No, but that is pretty good. No,
you can target any permanent with the.
I had never really considered that. No, I never got to live any Horobi dreams, unfortunately.
No, me neither, unfortunately. Then, I mean, we have a bunch of cards that are quite similar. I mean, I have also Artistic Refusal, also Breach the Multiverse. I guess I didn't see just how powerful Breach will be. Card that I missed that you didn't buy that much, Assimilate Essence. I honestly probably just part of me undervaluing blue in general and blue controlling decks in particular. And the fact that it never misses, even if you have this as a useless card, you at least get a creature out of it, which is not a terrible result. And also the fact that Assimilate Essence in this format was actually pretty good till the late game, because even if opponent has 9 lands on the board and they play Atali, you still have a use for that Assimilate Essence. And a couple of times, I mean, I literally a couple of games ago, I was stuck with this Assimilate Essence in the very late game, and opponent play Elish Nord Grand Cenobite, and it was perfect in that moment. So I think I underestimated how long does this card stay in the game as a relevant card, and probably that's why the grade was lower. Blighted Burgeoning, I misgraded it by 1 grade and a bit, and I'm still not a big fan of it, but mainly it's my personal experience of never getting them when I needed them. When I started drafting a deck that would perfectly use them, I never saw a single copy of it, and then I see them passing my nose when I'm drafting a Streamlined Knight deck. Card was definitely good. I think it was the best fixing in the format, better than Invasion of Zendikar, which we gave a very high grade in this format. I'm pretty sure Blighted Burgeoning was in almost every deck better than Invasion of Zendikar, because it gave you the creature already up front. It was not as good a creature, but it was still decent. It gave you all the mana that you want. It was good with Portrait Tracker, very good card. Nezumi Informant, that's a bit of a shameful miss for me because I was specifically ranting about how I think this card is going to be bad, and it turned out to be pretty solid. Again, those 1 mana, 2 mana 1/1s that discard a card, pretty format specific, and in this format, this one was pretty good. Again, because games went longer, because there were bombs late in the game in the hands of the opponents, because this one body was actually relevant. You could just chomp something big like those, especially there were a bunch of decks with those large incubate tokens that just gained you 5 life, which is not bad for a 2 mana 1/1 that already got you a card.
And Convoke and
Convoke.
Red Black Sack, right? You could sack it to get a
counter.
counter.
Plenty of things. So I missed on all those things, and I will have to think a bit harder about those things. I'm pretty sure that next time we evaluate a set that has a 1/1 discard a card creature, it's going to be terrible, and then we're going to overvalue it.
I think the card is not that good in a vacuum. If it literally just a 1/1 that chump blocks, like it's not actually very good.
Yeah, we saw it in Streets of New Capenna when the card was just nothing.
Yeah, but then again you look
Kamigawa,
at Neon Dynasty, and it's like one of the best commons. So I think context is huge, and so we can do our best to try to hash out how that context is going to work.
Yeah, Invasion of Eldraine, also a bit of a shameful miss. I just didn't see the 4 mana discard 2 cards as a good ability in this format, and it was a good ability. And I thought that, this thing on the flip is just mediocre, but actually a 2/2 flyer was pretty good most of the time, and the fact that it didn't even have to attack to do some damage was pretty decent. So the card played out much better than it did in my head. It literally is, in my head, that card was honestly pretty bad, and I probably would have graded it even lower if not for my optimism on battles, which makes me think about how I missed on how this card was decent in this format. And Seed of Hope, same thing. I completely didn't do the maths about what are the odds of missing. If I did the maths on what are the odds of missing, I would have probably upgraded by quite a lot, because even if you have 6 non-permanent spells in your deck, apart from Seed of Hope, you still have 98% chance of hitting, which is good enough to play it because you basically never miss it. Traumatic Revelation, we discussed that card, and Captive Weird I missed by a whole grade. And this is painful because it's one of my favorite cards in the set. I love playing with it. It's like literally one of the few cards that I might consider picking over Breeding Champion. Mainly because of
sometimes that being right, and the
types of deck I'm playing are more conducive to playing Captive Weird. Still, I mean, it's a hard choice when you have that pick. Okay, so let's go with the biggest misses the other way. And here comes your biggest miss, by the way. It's the Invasion of Kaldheim.
That's the red one?
Yeah, that's the red one that flips into something, discarding cards, whatever. You see, this is the problem. The card was supposed to be good. It just like...
Yeah, I don't know. Like, here's the thing. I still
look at the first 5 cards on the list, by the way.
Yeah, Invasion, and we'll just say Invasion. Everyone know what we're talking about. Yeah, Invasion of Kaldheim, 8 misses, so that's what, 2.5
almost 3 grades, yeah.
Almost 3 grades. Yeah, I still, like I said, I still kind of think that card is good, but I can never draft it appropriately because everyone took it early because it actually wasn't that good. So anyways, it ended up not being that great, but I think also this is the type of card where it looks like it's a value engine and then you just play everything, where I think actually where this card is best is like getting the board presence and then only having maybe 2 or 3 cards in your hand, because then you just get the value of playing like 1 or 2 more of it, and you don't with the card you didn't get to choose what you discarded, so it doesn't have that much control. Like if you have a really good card in your hand, you don't want to play the Invasion of Kaldheim. So I think it's an incredibly difficult card to play, which means it probably lost a lot of percentage that way, and was picked way too aggressively and put in the wrong decks, and still looks better than it actually was. So I would look at this card and say like my personal evaluation, like I still think it's good. I just think it's way not, like, obviously I was way off on it. But the actual strength of the card, I think, is not reflected in the graph. But some of the other ones, like Invasion of Chandelar, being 7 over on that one, like, okay, that card I think was not actually very good. So I think that was just a pretty big miss on my part. Invasion of Kamigawa, I think it again, it kind of looked like getting the what's it called? Thieving Magpie on the backside. I thought, oh, that might be kind of good. But just the tap effect for 4 mana was not enough, and it's difficult to flip. I think with battles in particular, I really overestimated how reasonable it was to give your opponent the extra 4 to 6 life to be able to flip something. I think not even on this list was what's the blue invasion that you could go and search your library for instant or whatever.
Oh, Arcadius.
Yeah, that's not even on the list. But I remember I think I read over it like that too for the same thing. Invasion of Moag, the green-white one. Invasion of Urgamon, the red-green one. That deck just kind of missed, but we see a pattern here.
I think Moag was better in the end. It's just like it was played badly, I think, in decks that were trying to be too mid-rangey when it was supposed to be a top end for the aggressive version. And probably still then Storm the Seedcore was a better card.
Right. Drawn and Linvala being 6 over. I think Black White was just bad, which really brought it down. I think the card was fine.
Like, imagine if Drawn and Linvala was a blue-black card. That would have been pretty decent B+ kind of rare, and it ended up like a C- or something.
Yeah, I think that's mostly what's going on there. Glistening Deluge, we already talked about that one. Kroxa and Kunaros being 5 off. I think the biggest thing about this is it's a
we didn't talk about Glistening Deluge.
That was the sideboard one, right?
No. Oh, is it?
Yeah, I gave it a B, and you should not give sideboard grades when you're.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. We did.
You're thinking of Glistening Dawn, the green one.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that card's incredible. I would not miss on such a thing.
One would hope so.
I'm just kidding. Crooks and Kruneros, Mardu colors. I think the biggest thing is the format was splishy splashy, but mostly only when you're green. So I think this card was like particularly hard to put into your deck. And while powerful, it like wasn't often justified to do that. And black, white, and red are some of the worst colors to combine. So I think the card probably got played in a lot of spots where like the rest of the deck was bad too. So that really probably brought down some of its win rate as well. Heliod, the Radiant Dawn. I thought, oh, 4/4 for 4. How bad can it be? Well, apparently pretty bad. And then lastly, Invasion of New Capenna. I think this one, again, I sort of envisioned a white-black deck that could take advantage of it, which didn't really exist because that's not really what the format was about. Because white-black decks did try to grind, but all the blue decks and everything went over the top of them. So there's a big problem with this type of card. Not a ton of sack fodder in the format, and I thought the backside with the Holy Frazzle Cannon would be a lot better than it was, and apparently wasn't.
No, it wasn't. I mean, this is the same miss as I had on the Phyrexian Lord. It's just like the Phyrexian deck did not exist. It was just not fast enough to dent and Bomby deck, and and it was not powerful enough in the late game to win with the aggressive decks, and that was the problem. It was the worst kind of mid-range, the mid-range that is not good at attacking and it's very bad at staying in the long game. That's it.
Exactly.
So my biggest misses, I extended my list so that I can punch myself harder. Invasion of Moag, we already said. I gave it even a higher grade than you did. I missed it by whole 7 grades. I still think card is better than it deserves. Heliod, the Radiant Dawn, same. I thought it would be pretty decent because it's like 4/4 with an upside in white, like a good top end, and just turned out not to be the case. Invasion of Kaldheim, Invasion of Kamigawa, same 2 that you had. Crux and Kunaros, same as you had. Invasion of New Capenna, same as you had. We missed exactly on the same cards. And again, we graded the cards independently, so it shows a certain similarity in the way of thinking there, at least when we look at our biggest misses.
Those cards... yeah, we the thing is, some of these cards I think actually are decent, but they really don't fit in the format and what those decks are trying to do, or the decks are just bad. So I think that's like part of the biggest takeaway too.
Yeah, it's like what I always call the feed the serpent problem, where this analogy is getting more and more outdated, and now like half of the people say, "What is feed the serpent?" That was a removal from Kaldheim, at 4 mana, exile a creature, and it was just bad because black was bad in that format. Normally, in any other format, that would have been a really strong card. Not there. So yeah, Invasion of Ergamon, that was also a card that was high on, and it turned out to be pretty bad. We talked about it, but it's just that it didn't end up what Green Red wanted to do, and Green Red didn't end up as something that was really particularly good. Invasion of Belenon, I was also higher on that card. In the end, I played it in one deck that I had, and it had 3 Marshals of Zalfir, and in that deck it was actively good because if you play it as reliably as a 3/3 knight, it becomes all of a sudden a pretty good card. But the 2/2 knight was so underwhelming, and the amount of effort you had to put into flipping it just to get the +1/+1 boost was most of the time not worth what you were doing, because obviously you'd rather go 5 damage to the face and kill the opponent rather than flip the battle.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. You talk about the amount of effort, and I would say that's something to take away from our graphs is like all the cards we massively overrated is cards that either were understated and require something, which is the case of the Belenon, or just cards that just like the setup cost and all this types of stuff is like enormous, right? Outside of a couple, but like even looking at like New Capenna, right? Not only does it have the deck problem that we talked about, but like the amount of setup cost for that in an environment where sacrifice is not particularly supported goes to show
Yeah.
that Kaldheim was my biggest miss, and like they all kind of fit into that category, right? So
I look at this list and now I figured it out. What you should be doing is playing Invasion of New Capenna in the deck that you have Croxand Kunaros in, and also you have Furnace Rains in.
yeah, there
Solve
was
the
one
problem.
good card that you talked about.
Solve the problem completely. You just need to play Mardu Sacrifice rather than Rakdos Sacrifice, and all is good. You found homes for all those cards. Scrappy Bruiser, I don't know why I gave a higher grade to this card. It was atrocious, and that was just a bad evaluation in vacuum. I just looked at the card and I thought, man, maybe if there's like an aggressive deck, some ETBs, whatever. Turned out not to be the case. Not World Hermit. That's a green 4/4 that flips into a 5/5. The problem with this card was there was so much interaction and it was so expensive to flip. I had decks where it was good, but these were the decks where I was threatening with attacking with multiple not World Hermits, and I didn't flip them. And then at some stage when opponent had to deal with it at the face value, I felt like a winner, and that was basically it. But anytime you tried to flip it, it ended up in a disaster on mana. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, that card had pretty poor numbers. It was like a C plus, if I remember correctly, according to our independent metric. I still think that the card is better than the win rate suggests, meaning that people played it badly, I guess, or in the wrong deck. Because
Yeah, no, I think that card is good.
It always worked for me. It always worked for my opponents.
Yeah, so you probably only overrated it by like 2 or 3 and like how good the card actually is, but it didn't play out that way.
Yeah, exactly. Into the Fire, that I was clearly my miss. I just love the cards like that, and I probably put too much into it. I thought also, like, if aggro was the thing to play in that format, Into the Fire would have been a much better card, but because more often than not you were using the other mode of fixing your draws, that's not a good option. You would maybe want to use 80% of the time a sweeper and 20% of the time draw some cards. And in this format, probably you more like 70% of the time draw some cards, and sometimes you use it as a sweeper. And then still, because you need to play so many early drops just to stay in the game, you probably wrecked half of your board as well. So that's why probably the card was not good. And then Remorsion Greatsword. I saw it as like a big finisher in those go wide decks, and I still think that it's good as such. And I think that my miss here is more like your miss on the into the burn down the city.
City
Is
on
it
Fire, yeah.
cities? Yeah, city on fire.
Yeah, no,
It's
Greatsword was good, but
yeah,
it wasn't good in every deck.
yeah. I think that was overplayed by people that just put it in a random deck where it didn't have a spot. I think it was pretty good. Like for example, in the decks with Invasion of Kaladesh, that was like a great card in those decks.
I literally played 2 Remotion Greatswords in my Arena Day 2 deck, so
There you go.
the open deck. So it must be decent. Then again, I didn't make the draft too, so maybe not.
Hmm. At least you played in day 2. I can't say that about myself. One more thing that I decided to look at was, and I didn't change the title of the slide, so that's confusing, but was evaluation by the mana value of the card. Because obviously we want to reevaluate cards, and I thought, is there any trends in terms of how we evaluate cards depending on their mana value? Now, obviously, mana value 0 was lands, and there were not that many in the set. We missed them on average by 1 or 0.7 in my case, because you gave them sometimes different grades, and it turned out that they were quite flat on their power level. So I think that's the only reason. One drops, we did a good job. You were off by 0.4 grades. I was spot on one drops on average. I mean, I had my misses and I had my successes in those, I guess, but they averaged to 0. So
Well
that's
done.
good. 2 drops, also 0.6, 0.4. We were pretty much half a grade off. I think it's a pretty decent result. And then as the mana value increases, our misses become bigger and bigger.
I think
And
just the takeaway, right, is that we have properly, changed the context of ones and twos being better and better over the last few years. And so it looks like we talked about that, but we still haven't compensated for lowering the 4s, 5s, and 6s, right?
yeah, but also interesting that we overrated almost on every level, except for
Oh
7
yeah,
drops that
yeah.
we underrated, and that's mainly driven by Breach and Italy.
Right.
So yeah, I think that my takeaway from this graph is that I'm going to look much more critically on 4 or 5 drops in the new set, because in a modern limited, those 4 or 5 drops, they need to do much more than being a vanilla 4/4 that was probably enough to be a semi-common mythic common 7-8 years ago.
Hmm.
All right, do we
Yeah,
have
if we
anything
if we
else?
gave everything 0.5 lower across the board, we'd have probably be feeling a lot better about ourselves, right?
Oh,
You know.
definitely.
So
We would have many more hits and still stay quite decent in the set evaluation. Um, Yeah, that would be actually. I didn't do that analysis, but maybe I can like lower our grades by half and see how well it predicted, just to see if it was just a generic. We gave it too high grades by half a point. I'll test it and I'll send you the results later. But I think that this is it in terms of our analysis. Do you have any like final thoughts about?
overall, I think for our first one, like I said, I think we did pretty well. Because a lot of these we were maybe only about a half a letter grade off on a lot of the things, or maybe one letter grade off, which is pretty good, I would say. In the aggregate. So props on that. And I think, like you said, this last slide is really evident that just modern day limited. I think we have to really downgrade a lot more expensive cards, unless there's something like an Atali, in which case, if it takes over the game, then it can still be good. So we have to kind of think about the push and pull of that. I also think there were some good points that you were bringing up, where if we look at the context of individual cards, but also what we think the cohesive strength of colors is, then you do kind of have to play a little bit of a game trying to think maybe about the color balance overall, because if colors overall are worse or better, then all the cards within those colors are going to be worse or better. And so you can, if you don't account for that, then it's going to reflect in the data. But of course, if you think an entire color is better than it is, you're gonna mess up on all of it, right? So you kind of have to take some swings, I think, in terms of evaluating whether or not the set is color balanced or not. And so it's going to be interesting. There's more questions moving forward that can help with grading for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in my defense, or I don't know if it's a defense or condemnation, I did think about it in the first set review. I just honestly thought that red, for example, would be a better color in this.
Yeah, no, I did it card by card. So I'm just saying, like, I think, the process of it, the first time I looked through the cards, then pretty cursory. And then when I went through and did my grades again after that, I think the first time I need to kind of look through and think about like maybe curve considerations and colors overall and what are some themes and that kind of, and do a little bit of a deeper dive. Spend some more time up front before I give the letter grade.
Do you think we can do some other metrics for the next time for the set review? That would be useful for you.
I think you covered a lot of them in terms of like by color, by biggest misses. I think also maybe something we could add is just, obviously you can't go through every single one we got right on, but I think the reasons why we were successful would be useful, because my takeaways here is what I need to change for next time to improve it. But I'm not sure exactly what I got right without thinking about it. And so I want to do that again, right?
Oh, don't
So
worry.
it's
I'll send you the whole comparison later, so that you at least can watch it. Just to tell you, because I was thinking very hard about doing the set, about the couple of slides about the cards that we nailed, and there were 13 cards that we both got correctly only, and then you had 33.
So that might be a good combine. Like next time, if we look at the 13 that we each got, then, because I think probably the reason we each got them is we understood something about those particular cards within that format, right?
I can give you those right now, but it was the point. I didn't do it because the list was pretty eclectic. There were a couple of bombs, couple of classic Ds on that list. So
so maybe the takeaways weren't too
great
on
okay.
it.
And I'm in my Excel and figuring out how to sort the things. Delta, Neil, and Cirque. Smallest to largest plus okay, I think that will do it. Will it? Okay, so the cards that we all got correct, 13 of them. Chandra, we gave it both A minus. Archangel Elspeth, we both gave it A minus. So clearly we know how to evaluate planeswalkers that are A minuses.
Good takeaway.
Merciless Repurposing, we both gave it a B minus, and it turned out to be a B minus. Blight Reaper Thalid, we both gave it B minus, turned out to be a B minus. Then we have Overgrown Pest, both gave it a C plus, turned out to be a C plus. And again, I mean, there will be some places where we miss by a grade, but actually the difference was small. Because
but I think there is a takeaway there, which I think is valuable. Is like, if we look at those cards, I was talking about how if we looked at like Invasion of Kaldheim, these types of cards where they require a lot of setup, they're a lot of work, and we like way overvaluated them. If you look at cards like Merciless Repurposing, if you look at cards like the Blight Reaper Thalid, like you can tell they're just efficient, either removal spell value type thing or just like an efficient threat in the case of the Thalid. And that's just like, I think that's just going to, those cards are mostly going to be B minuses almost regardless of their context, right? Not 100%. Obviously the context still matters, but like in most limited sets, those are just going to be good limited cards.
Yeah, it doesn't have any synergies. It's just like, I mean, it probably can be a B plus when you have like a lot of synergy with sacrificing those 1/1s later, which was not the case in this.
So then we would continue to kind of evaluate them in that way. Okay, keep going.
Angelic Intervention, C pluses all across the board. Tangled Skyline, C plus across the board. Sandstalker, Moloch, C plus across the board. And then we have Etherblade Agent C, Tranquil Cove C, and just like we
Sure.
were bound to hit at least one of the dual lands because we gave them similar grades in all the cases. Urn of Godfire D and Kite Sail D plus. Those are, I think, all of the cards that we both.
Yeah, so I think there's a mix of the ones where it's like we've seen them again and again. And it's the types of cards that always perform that way, like Angelic Intervention, like just going to be a good card, usually just going to be a C plus. And then some of the other ones, it's like there is some context, but usually like if I look at a Kite Sail, I think sometimes it'll be a D plus, sometimes it'll be a D, sometimes in rare sets it might be a C minus. But it's interesting because I think there's a mix of completely context independent cards for the most part. This is just what they are, and that's mostly what we hit the nail on the head. And we want to continue to do that and not completely change our strategy on that to continue to be accurate. But then everything else, we want to be, we want to bring down our optimism a little bit on some of these other cards where if it requires work, they're probably worse than we're thinking overall.
Yeah, I think Angelic Intervention is one where it can be like a B minus in some sets when
and some might be C and others. Yeah, for
exactly.
sure.
Yeah, but okay, these were the ones. And what else? I need to get rid of my bloody Excel. Yeah, I think that this is more or less it for this time. So with that knowledge, we can start preparing for the set review, which, as I said, is going to be next week. And yeah, thank you very much, Neil, for dedicating your time to do those set reviews and then reevaluate them. So yeah, with that, I would want to acknowledge 17 lands because without them, we wouldn't be able to calculate our bloody tier levels as they are fully dependent on the win rates of people using 17 lands. Obviously, thanks to Fake Jake Brown, who's going to be my secret helper in releasing this as a podcast. Thanks to SSCO and Mana Junkie, who are making the music of the podcast. And obviously, thanks to my patrons and to mtgazone.com for sponsoring my streams and podcast. So thanks for that. Do you have any place where we can still find you, or are you exclusively now in Sherkovic's content?
Well, right now, mostly just guest podcasting here or there. So yours, every once in a while on limited level ups with quarter calls. You can still find me at Trumpetman _ on Twitter. But yeah, not doing the weekly podcasting right now just because it ended up being too much of a time commitment. So hats off to you, sir, for all your content dedication. I know it's a lot.
Oh God, don't even get me started on I do miss your podcast, to be fair. Maybe you should consider doing a monthly episode or something, but I know how much of a pain it can be. Right. I mean, we're done with the stuff. So hopefully see you next week for actual full set review of the Lord of the Rings. We are not going to try to be the first ones to do it this time, but we're going to try to make it decent. As you can see, we're preparing, even by looking at the previous formats, how to make the set reviews better. So yeah.
Sounds good.